There's a curious silence that forms in the space between a man and a woman, a silence that doesn't comfort but unsettles. And it's here, in that delicate psychological terrain, that manipulation often takes root. We've been taught to associate manipulation with lies, betrayal, or aggression, but the most dangerous forms are subtle, psychological, almost invisible, like shadows that move when you're not looking. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And nowhere is this more evident than in relationships where a man cannot name the forces that quietly govern his emotions. He just feels controlled, diminished, or addicted, but can't quite explain why. Today, we peel back that veil. The first tactic is withdrawal, not the kind that signals growth or introspection, but the kind that functions as psychological warfare. A woman pulls away, not with rage or argument, but with silence, with distance, with an unspoken tension that activates every fear lodged in a man's unconscious mind. And men, biologically and socially conditioned to be protectors and problem solvers, immediately shift into panic mode. Did I do something wrong? Did I miss her birthday? Is she upset with me? This is not communication. It is not vulnerability. It is ambiguity used as a weapon. Because when someone withholds emotional clarity, they place you into a psychological maze where every path leads to self-blame. And in trying to solve the unsolvable, the man becomes the one who kneels, who apologizes, who begs for reassurance from someone who never offered him any in the first place. Withdrawal, in this context, becomes a ritual of psychological dominance, not a break from conflict, but a performance of absence, the illusion of retreat that provokes pursuit. The woman doesn't have to raise her voice. She just has to lower her presence, and the man will fill the silence with guilt, gifts, or supplication. It is not a form of care. It's a form of control. The second tactic is far more complex: mirroring. At first glance, it seems like compatibility. You meet someone, and suddenly, they love what you love. They share your values, your habits, your emotional language. You feel seen, but what if what you're seeing is not her, but a projection of you? Mirroring is one of the oldest psychological strategies in the book. In nature, it mimics camouflage. In seduction, it becomes a simulation of resonance. The woman subtly observes your emotional needs, your unspoken wounds, and reflects them to you like a mirror wrapped in affection. She doesn't challenge your inner structure. She imitates it. She doesn't force your walls down. She disarms them by becoming what those walls were built to protect. The danger is not that it feels fake. It doesn't. That's what makes it work. It feels profoundly authentic. And that's precisely the manipulation. A curated illusion of emotional harmony. You begin to trust. You begin to open. You believe you've found someone who finally gets you. But in truth, you've simply been psychologically profiled and tailored to. This is why many men feel deeply betrayed when the mask slips. Because it wasn't a breakup. It was a collapse of the reality they thought they were living in. It's not just the loss of the woman. It's the collapse of self-perception, of belief. The idea that their vulnerability was met with sincerity rather than strategic mimicry. And this leads us to the third manipulation: guilt. Guilt is the most efficient form of psychological leverage in any relationship. It's subtle, it's hard to detect, and it places the burden of proof on you. The man, the one who's supposed to make things right, even when nothing objectively went wrong. There's a deep cultural narrative that says a man's job is to keep a woman happy. Not loved, not respected, happy. But happiness is not a fixed state. It's fluid, and it's often shaped by a woman's psychological projections, childhood wounds, and unconscious expectations. When a woman uses guilt, she's not always doing it out of malice, but the effect is the same. The man becomes responsible for her emotions. She says, "I guess I'm just not important to you," when you miss a phone call. Or, "I just thought you'd care more," when you make a choice that honors your own needs. These statements don't invite conversation. They close it. They shame you into compliance, into doubt, into fixing things that aren't broken. Over time, a man begins to fear his instincts. He starts questioning whether his perceptions are valid. He knows something feels off. Perhaps she's being emotionally unavailable, maybe even disloyal. But the moment he brings it up, she flips the script. Suddenly, he's insecure. He's paranoid. He's overreacting. And because the average man is not trained in emotional manipulation, because he doesn't understand the weaponization of guilt, he apologizes. He self-corrects. He walks back his truth. And with every apology, his boundaries erode. Not because he did something wrong, but because he didn't want to lose someone who was never truly present to begin with. Guilt is insidious because it doesn't strike with force. It whispers. It infects the conscience. It rewrites your story from the inside out. You become the villain in a script you never wrote. And you stay, hoping to redeem yourself in a play that was rigged from the start. The fourth manipulation is more biological than logical. It's called the hot and cold technique, and it taps into a deeper psychological principle rooted in reward circuitry and addiction. It's the same principle that drives gamblers to chase after wins after a streak of losses. In psychology, this is called intermittent reinforcement. It's not the consistency of affection that creates attachment. It's its unpredictability. A woman showers you with warmth, passion, and intimacy. You feel safe, connected, maybe even euphoric. Then, nothing. She pulls back. Conversations dry out. Her tone changes. Her presence becomes a ghost. Suddenly, you're left in an emotional desert, wondering where the oasis went. Your mind scrambles to recover what was lost. You text more. You give more. You sacrifice more. You start replaying old memories to make sense of the present absence. And here's the irony. It's precisely that cycle, reward and withdrawal, that gets you hooked. You are no longer relating to her as a person. You're chasing a feeling, like an addict chasing a high. You're not in love with her anymore. You're in love with the version of her that showed up when she wanted something. And every time she pulls away, your nervous system screams for another hit. But the game is already won, by her. Because now, your attention is hers. Your energy bends toward her moods. Your value system shifts to avoid the withdrawal. And she doesn't even have to ask. You become predictable in your unpredictability. Emotionally trained, neurologically conditioned. And still, you stay. Something is unsettling about the way subtle influence works. Not as a command, but as a whisper you mistake for your thought. That's the nature of the fifth manipulation tactic. The power of suggestion. Unlike guilt or withdrawal, this doesn't create panic or shame. It creates desire. A desire that you think originated from within, but was quietly planted from without. Imagine this. You're walking with her, and she pauses briefly in front of a shop window. She looks at a dress or a bracelet and says, "I've always loved things like that, but I've never had someone who surprised me with gifts." It's not a request. It's not even a hint. It's a psychological breadcrumb, dropped in the fertile soil of your masculine instinct to provide. You file it away. Not because you feel pressured, but because something about her phrasing bypassed your critical thinking. It didn't come with an obligation. It came with emotional implications. She made you believe that your generosity would mean something more, that by doing it, you'd rise in her eyes, that you would be different from the men who disappointed her in the past. That's the illusion. She didn't tell you what to do. She shaped how you wanted to be seen. This isn't about materialism. It's about psychological priming. Suggestion works because it activates an archetype inside of you. Jung might call it the hero, the lover, or the provider, an unconscious image of the man you believe you must become to be worthy of love. And when that archetype is triggered, you don't feel manipulated. You feel inspired. You want to act. But who benefits? Who is being moved? And who is doing the moving? The power of suggestion leaves no fingerprints. There is no argument to remember, no order to resist. And yet, your actions begin to bend around her emotional cues, not because you were told to, but because your anima was seduced into doing it willingly. That's the brilliance and the danger of psychological suggestion. You don't see the influence until your soul is already rearranged. Which brings us to the final, and perhaps most dangerous manipulation, love bombing. This is not love. It is not bonding. It is psychological colonization dressed as romantic intensity. In its early stages, it feels transcendent. She calls you special. She floods your life with affection, intimacy, and attention. It's the fast-forward button of emotional connection. Day 1, she's intrigued. Day 2, she's enchanted. Day 3, she's convinced. By the end of the week, she's talking about soulmates. But here's the secret. True connection grows through depth, not speed. And depth requires space, reflection, silence. When someone floods you too quickly, they're not building a bond. They're bypassing your defenses. You don't fall in love. You get swept away. And what feels like fate is emotional capture. This tactic is especially effective on men who have never felt deeply seen, on men whose childhood left them starving for feminine nurturing, on men who mistake intensity for sincerity and attention for devotion. The more deprived you were, the faster you'll fall. Because love bombing isn't about her, it's about what she makes you feel about yourself. And once you're fully invested, once you've idealized her, once you've made her the center of your inner world, she has control. Subtle, unspoken, invisible control. Your emotions rise and fall according to her presence. Your days brighten when she texts. Your nights darken when she doesn't. And without realizing it, you've become a satellite orbiting her gravity. What makes love bombing so sinister is that it doesn't just manipulate your behavior, it manipulates your story. You begin to rewrite the narrative of your life around her. You tell yourself she's the one, not because of who she is, but because of how you felt during that dopamine-soaked flood of affection. You create meaning where there was only strategy. And when she pulls back, when the love slows, when the texts become fewer, when the warmth turns cold, you don't question her. You question yourself. What did I do wrong? Did I change? Did I stop being enough? That's the final stage of the trap. Self-doubt. You chase the emotional high, not realizing it was engineered to disappear the moment it served its purpose. And the woman? She's not a villain in her own story. Often she doesn't even fully realize what she's doing, because manipulation is rarely conscious. It's the performance of wounded femininity, shaped by a culture that teaches women to manage power through emotional influence. That's the paradox. Many women aren't malicious. They're simply enacting strategies they've been taught work. Strategies that leverage beauty, silence, emotion, and suggestion. Because in a world where masculine energy is still seen as dominant, feminine power often hides in the shadows. But make no mistake, manipulation, conscious or not, is still manipulation, and the consequences are real. A man begins to lose his clarity, his center, his sense of inner authority. He becomes reactive instead of grounded, dependent instead of sovereign, and worst of all, he becomes addicted to the very woman who is hollowing him out. So what can a man do? You don't need to rage against the feminine. You don't need to shame her or attack her. What you need is discernment. The ability to name what's happening beneath the surface. To say, this feels like control, not love. To say, this attention feels too fast, too forced. To trust your nervous system when it flinches in the silence, not chase it. Because the truth is, a woman who respects you will not manipulate you. She will not disappear to provoke you, mirror you to seduce you, guilt you to control you, or flood you with love to bind you. A woman in her mature feminine power doesn't need to. She will communicate directly. She will challenge you honestly. And most importantly, she will honor the sacred dance between masculine and feminine without distorting it for personal gain. But if you don't know what manipulation looks like, you won't know when you're already inside it. You'll mistake guilt for empathy, suggestion for admiration, withdrawal for mystique. And by the time you realize it was a performance, you'll be too deep to walk away clean. That's why Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But ask yourself, what are you being transformed into? And who exactly is holding the match? When a woman uses manipulation, it's not always conscious, but its effects are real. And what makes it truly dark is that the damage is not done through violence or betrayal, but through slow erosion of clarity, of self-respect, of masculine integrity. In the final phase, you're no longer in a relationship, You're in a psychological maze, and the longer you stay, the more you lose sight of where you came from. The truth is, not every woman uses these tactics. But for the ones who do, whether by learned behavior, emotional insecurity, or covert self-protection, they rely on one thing: your ignorance of what's happening. Because when you can't name it, you can't resist it. And when you can't resist it, you surrender without realizing it. Let's return to the psyche. Carl Jung wrote extensively about projection, that we don't see others as they are, but as we are. So when a man is drawn into manipulation, it's often because some part of his unconscious is complicit, not responsible, but receptive. There's something unhealed in him, an inner wound, a longing, a forgotten hunger, that the manipulative woman speaks to like a siren, not with truth, but with illusion. That's the part we rarely examine. The question is not just, why is she manipulating me? But, why did I let her in so deeply before I knew who she was? What in you that was so thirsty for affirmation that you drank from a poisoned well? What were you seeking? A mother you never had? A goddess you never believed you deserved? A redeemer who would rescue you from your emotional numbness? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. Because if you don't examine your anima, your own unconscious feminine, you'll keep falling for hers. Not because she's powerful, but because your shadow wants to be seen. And even distorted affection can feel like salvation when you're starving. This is why most manipulation doesn't look like control. It looks like chemistry. It feels like fate. But what if fate is just trauma looping in disguise? What if your most intense connections are not soulmates, but karmic repetitions of the same emotional script? And what if she's not hypnotizing you, but simply playing a role in a story you never stopped rehearsing? There's a saying in ancient Stoicism: you become what you pay attention to. And in love, that law becomes a mirror. If you give your focus to someone who twists reality, who pulls you close only to push you away, who builds you up just to watch you unravel, then you are not in love. You are in bondage. Not to her, but to your own unexamined needs. Many men think the solution is to become colder, harder, unemotional. But that's not strength. That's reaction. That's pain with a mask. What you truly need is not more distance from your emotions, but more sovereignty over them. You need to feel without being led by your feelings. You need to love without abandoning your discernment. You need to open without collapsing. Because masculinity is not about control. It's about containment. The ability to hold space without being consumed by it. The ability to witness beauty without needing to possess it. The ability to sit in the presence of a woman's power and not shrink or chase. Manipulation loses its grip the moment you return to your center. Not through confrontation, not through revenge, but through clarity. You don't need to win against a manipulative woman. You just need to walk away before you're carved into something smaller than yourself. Before you begin to equate intensity with love, silence with mystery, and emotional chaos with depth, ask yourself, who do I become when I love her? That is the truest mirror of all. You see, the anima, your inner feminine, is not a weakness. It is your sensitivity, your intuition, your creative and emotional vitality. But when you project that sacred energy outward, onto a woman who has not earned it, you hand her the map to your soul. And if she's manipulative, she will use that map not to build with you, but to dominate you. Not through violence, through praise, through withdrawal, through implication. That's the horror of psychological control. It doesn't scream, it whispers. So what's the way out? Begin by noticing, naming, becoming aware, without judgment. When she withdraws, ask yourself, am I chasing peace, or am I chasing her approval? When she mirrors you, ask, am I being understood, or just reflected? When she uses guilt, ask, whose story am I living, hers or mine? You don't need to rage. You don't need to shame her. You don't need to play her game. You just need to see it for what it is. Because manipulation only thrives in confusion, in silence, in your refusal to trust your perceptions. And when you do begin to trust yourself, when you stand in your stillness, when you stop responding to every emotional bait, when you learn to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it, you become immune, not invulnerable, but sovereign. And that, more than any tactic or technique, is what breaks the cycle. In the end, a woman can only manipulate the man who refuses to confront the truth of himself. But when you do, when you finally stop projecting the goddess onto the ghost, when you stop mistaking your anima for her affection, you take back the narrative, and you remember, love is not performance. Love is not chaos. Love is not a test you have to keep passing to stay worthy. It's presence, mutual, steady, and free of distortion. And if she can't meet you there, then she doesn't deserve to walk beside you.